Hello, bestie. It's Jenna. It must be noted that I really must love doing this podcast because I am literally recording outside at a park. Yes, how lovely. It's 49 degrees Fahrenheit. I am in the shade on a park bench. Yeah, one of my friends has said that Nashville weather is definitely a girl who is bipolar, off her meds, and PMSing. And I could not agree more because, yeah, this isn't fun. Welcome back to my podcast, Finding Ourselves in the Ashes. I want to say this is episode 4 or 5. I'm not too sure, don't quote me. I'll probably say in the description which one it is after I figure it out. So here on this podcast called Finding Ourselves in the Ashes with your host, Jenna London Richards, we discuss topics related to health, wellness, and personal growth. Emphasis on personal growth, everything is kind of a subtopic of that main topic. If you're inclined to listen to previous recordings on SoundCloud, which I will link in the description, please be advised there is triggering material with no trigger warning, so listener discretion is highly advised. So let's get into today's episode. A lot of times we can trust or put our trust in a religious leader, a brand, an influencer, a romantic partner, a friend, etc. I think part of our humanity is that we are trying to build connections between people, places, animals, things, and trust is a very fundamental part of that. And often within that trust, we are let down by the very things that we trust. You know, I could even go into when you warm a pizza too hot and you take a bite and burn the roof of your mouth or your tongue. I know that's a silly example, but I think I'm hungry. I may be a Christian, but lots of times I have thrown up my hands because God's quote-unquote plan is baffling at best. But what about trusting ourselves? In college, I would take exams, and when I took those exams for my college courses, especially psychology exams, I was absolutely plagued with anxiety. I mentioned in an earlier podcast how my friend Janet's daughter, Amy, was struggling with tests due to anxiety. And I do realize that it is becoming increasingly more common to have standardized tests and to test the student aptitude. In all actuality, you know, the conspiracy theorist in me says that is like purely for their statistics. And that's often not an accurate way of measuring what a person's true aptitude is, because anxiety could cause their grade to be a bad grade. So going back to my, studying and overcompensate by studying, I would do any number of things. I had so many methods of study, from, printing out the study guide and then writing all of my notes and everything in with it and reviewing it to the point where I had it memorized. I fell under the idea that if I didn't study for a certain amount of hours, I would fail. So there were often times where it would take me 10 to 15 hours to study for one exam. And at the time, I did have a tremendous amount of pressure because my grandparents were paying in full for my college tuition, my textbooks, and any fees that were associated with me getting back and forth to my college campus or college campuses, as I was going to community college at the time. And again, this is purely out of my grandparents' pockets. I'm not going to get into why right now, as it's not relevant. And so I was very much pressured into getting A's and B's, because I was trying to, show my grandparents that they weren't wasting their money. And, when we talk about my family, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts, they weren't perfect. There were so many times When my dad, my uncles, my older brother, my grandmother would gaslight me or just challenge me, just try to show me that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. And, the way that they, constantly challenge me, constantly gaslight me and everything, it made me start to not be able to trust myself. And I can see it now that getting me to doubt myself made them superior to me. And the thing is, that culture of getting people to doubt their intelligence, getting people to doubt that they know what they know, it is very commonplace among the Judeo-Christian belief, especially Protestant Christians. There is a study, theory, however you want to call it, referred to as apologetics. And apologetics is basically taking evangelism and turning it into a debate class. And I've seen a lot of videos. I think it's Kirk Cameron, who was on the show Growing Pains as well as in the movie Fireproof. He partners with a man that I don't even remember his name, and probably best that I don't. But they do a lot of those videos where they use apologetics and other kinds of social pranks and things to tell people about God. And to me, looking back, I really despise what they're doing because they're making people out to be idiots. They're making people that don't believe in God out to be idiots. And the thing is, I don't think I have to put science outside of my God. I don't think that I have to put human suffering outside of my God. I don't think that if I have questions about what I believe in, I think they should be asked and they should be answered. Going back to the lack of trust, it has led me to fluctuate between thinking I'm this beautiful, wonderful person with this great personality, or thinking that I'm not pretty enough because of my acne, because of being overweight. My lack of trust has made me form several habits. One habit I have is that I constantly check to see if I have my phone, my wallet, and my charger with me because, I am so afraid I'll misplace them. I've watched survival videos. I've watched self-defense videos. I actually will not ever go anywhere if my battery is under a certain percentage. And I have probably only intentionally let my battery get to 10 or 9%, probably only a handful of times in the last couple years. So how can I actually start to believe? And the reason for the battery percentage thing is, that I always question my safety. So how can I start to believe that I'm trustworthy, and how can I be confident but not arrogant? By the way, I am sorry for all the tangents I go on. Let it be said. I have ADHD. It runs in my family. I can't help it. So I did mention the question, how can I be confident but not arrogant? So I'll tell you what my personal definition of the difference is. A confident person knows their strengths and their weaknesses. So they know their limits, they know their capabilities, they have a very realistic grasp of what they are and are not capable of. However, an arrogant person has far to fall due to their pride. Arrogant people are often embarrassed. They're often called out because, they're telling an unrealistic story, or they say that they can do something when they actually can't, and so on. So we're going to dive into I'm not going to go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Just screw it. I'm going to go into some things that can help you learn to trust yourself. And I did research on Google and read through a couple of articles. And it was very interesting that, different articles from different websites were basically saying the same thing. And so pulling from what was most common on those websites is what I'm going to impart with you. I've often brought up affirmations, and it is so important. Often lack of trust in self is from bullying, abuse, and or gaslighting that was constant and or continuous. It's been said that when you or someone else tells you something enough times that you will believe it. So think of affirmation as reprogramming your brain. So let's say you were told that you never amount to anything. Say you were told that you were ugly. Let's say you were told that you were dumb. Saying things like, I'm smart, I'm beautiful, I'm capable. Saying that every single day, it's recommended you do it in front of a mirror. It's recommended that it be a full-length mirror and you do a power pose. So think of, before a superhero is about to kick some ass, how they, just do that pose like, oh yeah, I got this. Their little Chuck Norris pose. Various articles on self-trust and even breakups and loss say that feeling your feelings is necessary. For those of us who have been abused or bullied, we're allowed to grieve the connections we never had. We are allowed to feel betrayed, humiliated, angry, sad, and question why me. And I know I'm going off on a tangent, but trust me, I have a purpose because this is in direct reference to affirmations. My friend Janet told me that an abusive ex did admit that he was drawn to her because she wasn't confident enough. And I've heard so many people say that confidence will send a potential abuser running in the opposite direction. So, sinus infection, still recovering. So I wanted to mention that because I wanted to make the point of how important those affirmations are, especially for people who are women or identify as female. It is very common for us to enter into some toxic relationships, and unfortunately, if we are able to break away from that person, they're able to find another victim to harm. And going back to feeling your feelings, as I mentioned, acknowledgement of feelings can lead you out of the mire of low self-esteem and self-pity. Because once you accept that you do not believe in yourself, you can make light of the question, how can I start to believe in myself? So, probably if you were going to do certain steps in order, feeling your feelings would be number 1, and then would come affirmations. Because if you're able to name your feelings, which, if you're not, just go online. I'm sure Google will have an extensive list of feelings, and you can kind of figure out which ones you're dealing with. And once you figure out kind of what your feelings are, you can also figure out what your affirmations need to be based on those feelings. So, if you feel humiliated, you can say you're proud of yourself. If you say, you're betrayed, you can say that, it's okay to trust myself. Things like that. So when it comes to believing in ourselves, trusting ourselves, I love the story of a man of color who in his 80s finally learned to read and write. He was a very intelligent man without having the ability to read and write. And he was such a hard worker that he was often offered promotions, but because he would have to fill out some paperwork to receive the promotion, he declined to get those promotions because, he was too proud to admit to his employer that he couldn't read and write. And this man, lived with the regret of not being able to read bedtime stories to his grandchildren. If a man in his 80s can learn to read and write, then it is never too late for someone to start something such as believing in yourself. Further recommendations are to spend time alone with yourself and cultivating a good neighborhood in your in your head, cultivating a good neighborhood in your head. I am in the AA program. I know the attraction, not promotion thing, but I just wanted to throw it out there, and I probably will have a podcast where I do talk about my story and my struggles with addiction. However, there are a lot of sayings in the rooms of AA that do stick with you, and one of them talks about, going to those meetings, talking to your sponsor, reading AA literature, because it's not a good neighborhood inside your head. Often people get into toxic relationships. Often people will become workaholics or alcoholics, which I've done all of those things, because we cannot sit at home alone with our thoughts. And, trying to drive the point home, that is why affirmations are so important, because we have to combat the thoughts that when we rest will not let us rest. So I'm going to go into some exercises that different therapists have recommended. And if you live alone, have your own room, whatever, if you're able to do this, that's okay. If you're not able to do it, that's okay too. But I found that these were very helpful to me personally. So the first exercise I was given is called the 3 chairs. And yes, you're essentially playing musical chairs with yourself in 3 different chairs, but stick with me, it gets better. The goal is to create a dialogue between 3 parts of yourself. Which sounds crazy, hear me out. 1 chair is the accuser, 1 is the wounded, and the other is the advocate. The wounded expresses to the accuser their pain, and this can go for whatever age you were, so you can be a child talking to your abusive parent, guardian, or babysitter. The accuser obviously says nasty things that cause the wounded great insecurity, those things that stick with you in your head. But in doing this, you are also saying out loud the things that you let yourself believe. Now, my family had never told me that I was unwanted, unloved, and that they truly didn't care about me and didn't really want me to succeed. If they had me, they wanted me to just be their maid, and stay with them forever, and they would use any excuse, including my crippled mental health, which part of it was so damaged because of them. But at the same time, I feel like, if I read between the lines, that it's there. I don't love you. I don't care about you. I don't want you. If you're here to be convenient to me, because that's all you're good for. So that's examples of things that an accuser could say to the wounded. And the wounded is welcome to express to the accuser, that hurts me that you don't love me. That hurts me that you don't want me. That hurts me that you don't need me, but if I'm here, I'm convenient to you and you will use me. So where does the advocate fall into this? The advocate stands up for the wounded, defending them against the accuser and comforting the wounded. So, for example, other 12-step fellowships talk about reparenting yourself. So let's say you're dealing with childhood trauma and you're doing this exercise. Let's say that you're trying to reach out to, or you're trying to advocate for your younger self. You can kind of say something like, it is really messed up that you treated an innocent child like this. It is really messed up that you're so cold-hearted, you're so self-centered, you're so intent on hurting that if it's a child, if it's your own child, if it's a child you're taking care of for some reason, that you will treat an innocent child this way and show no remorse, and that you should be absolutely ashamed of yourself. And the afterlife, hopefully, is very unkind to you. So I had another therapist that said I should either put something on a chair that reminds me of the people that have harmed me, or go into the woods with a bat and kind of, I can beat the chair with a bat, or I can beat a tree in the woods with a bat, but the goal is to kind of like say the things that hurt you, the things that made you angry. She also suggested, the same therapist that suggested the bat to the tree, which I have yet to do, and girl, I can't wait. She also suggested drawing faces on paper lunch bags and saying the hurtful things that my family told me. And yeah, it can also be the hurtful things that are like reading between the lines, like unwanted, unloved. And then, of course, setting lunch bags on fire. I love fire. Anger, pain, betrayal, disappointment are all closely related. Closure is so necessary, and hopefully the exercises that I mentioned will give some kind of closure to someone who's been through some kind of pain. Hobbies and becoming good at them are highly recommended for cultivating self-trust as well. And it could be noted that we're not discussing fantasy football and or video games. Oh, it feels good to say that. I'm talking about arts and crafts, learning languages, learning instruments, reading books, or reading about how to write books. In other words, hands-on things that require effort and stimulate your mind. And please, for the love of God, do not tell me a video game or fantasy football stimulates your mind. Aim higher. Have higher standards, for frick's sake. The sense of accomplishing something like a language, a craft, an instrument is super rewarding. I knitted by hand an entire queen-sized bedspread, and it took me 14 months. Basically, it was 14 months of my grandmother telling me to stop screwing around and go knit. But you know what? Like, it's all good. Before I went on my 7-year self-help bender, I was obsessed with the 4 Dummies guides and the Complete Idiot Guide books. Okay, I need to pause this. I'm sorry. Okay, we're back. I'm still dealing with a terrible cough. So I mentioned a few moments ago that I was a voracious consumer of 4 Dummies and Complete Idiot's Guides, that I will admit that I never read one cover to cover. I skimmed them and got the parts that interested me. And through those books, I learned that my vocal range is mezzo-soprano. I wrote an entire instrumental on guitar using fingerpicking back when I had a guitar and practiced. I designed a workout routine for myself that I did at home and started to see some results from. So I want to say to you, the listener, do not feel silly at all for picking up a 4 Dummies book or watching an educational program for children. You are made to learn and grow. Your mind is a sponge. If you can learn to read and write at 80, then, you are essentially learning until the day you die, if not after. So if you're made to learn and grow, it doesn't have to be boring. Many how-to and self-help books are rather dry, and as someone who likely has severe ADHD, it helps to have things formatted for a child. Now, it's not necessarily that it's formatted for a child that gets me. It's just the fact of, like, there's colors, there's drawings, there's things that, like, you know, catch me and hold my attention. My uncle once said, when he saw me reading a National Geographic magazine, he said to my grandmother, when Jenna reads National Geographic, she looks at the pictures first. Fair point. That's true. And as much as I wish I could flip a switch and I'd have confidence and trust myself overnight, there is beauty in the journey. There is beauty in the brokenness. There is beauty in the beginning of healing that brokenness. And I don't know if I've mentioned it, but I have a lot of health problems. I do have a great-grandparent on one side who is inbred. My dad does show physical characteristics of inbreeding. And both sides of my family are Sephardic Levite Jews. So that basically means that, like, the inbreeding could go a lot further than just my dad's side of the family. Like, I'm not going to get into it. So I promise I'm making a point. I'm extremely sensitive to caffeine, and things like chocolate have caffeine, even though I love chocolate with all of my heart and soul. I've been in active psychosis several times before I was even in my 20s. And it was about 10 or 12 years ago that I was having brownies every day with my grandma. I don't remember why we had so many brownies that, like, every day for several days we could have tea. But having those brownies and no, I was not drinking coffee at the time, I felt like I was going into psychosis again. So I called my uncle, the same one who called me out for how I look at National Geographic. And I told him, how I was feeling. And my uncle brought up that I not only donated to the Christian publishing house that my grandmother translates for, but I had sent a note along with my donation, which I kind of had forgotten about. And my uncle spoke to one of the men for that publishing house at a conference he was at when I called him. And the gentleman told him, I have your niece's note pinned to the bulletin board in my office, and when I get discouraged, I look at her note. And that point is that sometimes we think we failed, we encounter a roadblock, a relationship ends, a loved one passes away, etc. But the universe, God, whatever you choose to call it, reminds us that this journey, although messy and heartbreaking and a complete uphill battle, is not a journey we have to do alone. For you, the listener, may you learn to be kind to yourself and others. May doors open that lead to healing and happiness. May doors of trauma, self-pity, and self-limiting beliefs close. When you are distraught, may joy find you. When you want to give up, may hope reach out to you. When you feel alone, may you find an ally. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, share, comment something nice, and consider following, subscribing, all that stuff. I will be uploading this podcast every 3 to 5 days. Hopefully I can stick with it. And if you have an inspirational story or something you know would help someone else, I would absolutely love to interview you. If you'd like to request a topic related to personal growth, I can do that as well. I am totally open to doing as much research as possible. My social media handles are in the description. And I will admit that lately I have had an issue with, reading what I've written and just mumbling and just totally tripping over my words. Yes, I do, in fact, like, read what I have written for the episode before I, speak on it to you all. And then I also, will, like, ad-lib and add some different stuff to it to make it kind of seem more conversational, because I don't want it to sound as scripted as it in fact is. And the reason why it is scripted is because I want my thoughts to seem as organized as possible, because there are times where I will do research for the episode to make sure that, it's correct and factual and everything. So with that being said, thank you so much for bearing with me. I don't know what the next episode will be. I'm thinking about doing one called When the System Fails You, which is very emotional and very trigger warning, like triggers on triggers. So stay tuned. Go ahead, follow, like, subscribe, all the good things. And thank you so much for listening, and do something that makes you smile today.